can see me. I had a real issue with my computer just now when I started this live in its previous iteration, and I think my computer was trying to reset itself under the bonnet there. I think there were some updates going on, and it didn't like it, and everything went completely wrong, and it was rather embarrassing. But here I am back again, possibly speaking to somebody, possibly speaking to nobody. That's hopefully a quick enough turnaround to have kept some of you engaged here and watching. Okay, so let's start. In fact, let's have a look, make sure that I do indeed have people there. Oh, yes, there are a few people watching, just a couple. So let me know if there are any issues with my audio, and I'll try and adapt. So, okay, what we are going to do is look at the comment. So I've already read this comment to you, but I know that some people that watch this video without having seen the other bit. But the essential part is somebody who's actually very pro-Ukraine, a member of the channel, wrote quite a harsh message saying, you know, hard but persistent shake. Let's be clear about this. Not just me, but other people you've had on your shows. It's not up to America. The ball is in the European court, not in America's. Please, please, please take responsibility for your mess. You totally shrunk your military. This is why Putin attacked Ukraine. I'm sorry, but it's Europe's fault. Ukraine is in the war. It's not the US's fault. We never experienced a peace dividend. Our scores are terrible. This is why we have Trump. We have states in equivalent to EU small nations without adequate educational healthcare. It's now your turn to pick up the tab, not America. Now, like, the situation is that Europe is picking up the tab, and Europe has now spent double what the United States has spent in supporting Ukraine. And Trump has consistently said he is not going to spend another penny on Ukraine, and Europe is spending the entirety of the money. So it's really hard to square this. I don't quite understand. Like, what I am suggesting is that the United States has the biggest military in the world. It has the biggest defense budget in the world by country mile. It spends the equivalent as the next 12 countries combined in terms of defense expenditure. It has thousands and thousands of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and Abrams tanks sitting in an Arizona desert, collecting dust. Like, the US has the ability to help Ukraine out, and it's in their strategic interest to do so. Like, the idea for me is that the US should be spending more on supporting Ukraine, because the US gains from Ukraine prevailing against Russia. Unless the US really has joined the dark side, unless the US has really aligned itself with Russia properly, for those who don't believe in the US taking that tack, then the US has to do something about that. And the US, you know, if you're saying it's not the US's fault, it's Ukraine's fault. Ukraine was attacked, right? It's Russia's fault. There's only one morally culpable entity here, and that is Putin and the Kremlin, like Russia. So no one's saying it's the US's fault. No one's saying it's Ukraine's fault, and no one's saying it's Europe's fault. Well, at least no one should be saying that, right? But the US does need to help, because we can say, actually, if we're talking about causal determinants as to where we are now, the fact that Russia has been at loggerheads with the US for 70 years is a lot to do with the US taking an ideological position against Russia, and Russia taking an ideological position against the US then collecting other allied nations around them as NATO, and trying to secure Europe by coming into Europe and having its armed forces in Europe to give stability, which then brings an ideological buffer zone to the United States, and it gives an economic stability and security that the US needs as a platform for its own economic security and stability. And so Europe has a lot of skin in the game here. Sorry, the US has a lot of skin in the game here. It really, really needs Ukraine to prevail. And so if it has a lot of skin in the game, then it needs to, you know, you've got to put in some investment in order to get that return on investment. And that investment is helping out a lot. Now, the US was doing that. Were they doing it quickly enough? Were they doing it enough in general? We can argue about Biden's position, but the Trumpian position now is just either completely aligned with Putin or saying we will help Ukraine by not actually helping them, but by selling stuff to other people who are going to help them. That's like the bully on the playground seeing someone getting beaten up and going, do you know what, I could help them. I've got some knuckle dusters and a baseball bat. I'm not going to get involved. But you guys can buy this off of me for your lunch money, and I'll make a pretty penny. Thank you very much. Is that person helping the kid getting kicked in on a playground? I guess indirectly it's helping, but it's not, I don't think, taking a morally robust position. I don't think there's a lot of moral clarity there with regard to. I think there is moral clarity. Like, the US isn't taking a position where it feels that Ukraine should prevail to the point that it helps, right? It's happy to sell stuff. It's like Slovakia. Yeah, I see the positions very, very similarly at the moment. So, yeah, I have a real problem with this. So this is acting as a segue into, well, let's look then to see what Europe is doing. Well, Europe's boosted artillery and munition production 6-fold in 2 years, according to NATO chief. So a lot of people have been complaining about Europe being too slow and the military-industrial complex being behind the curve. But actually, it's really difficult to, in peacetime, as in, okay, kind of geographical Europe is at war, as in Ukraine and even Russia to an extent, they are in Europe and they are fighting. But the EU and, the traditional sense of continental Europe, they have been essentially at peace. They're not at war. They are supporting a warring nation. So trying to get all of these supporting nations to ramp up as if they are at war to a wartime footing, that's not going to happen. 3.5 years is a long time, but actually we are at a point where Europe has reacted to a fairly significant degree, and they are starting to produce an awful lot more equipment. I'm not trying to just cheerlead for Europe here, but what I'm saying is that in response to people who say this is your problem, you need to deal with this from the US, and you hear this from the Trump administration, this is Europe's problem. Well, Europe have actually turned up, and they have now spent over twice what the Americans have in terms of supporting Ukraine. If you look at the Kiel Institute Ukraine War Tracker, then it is over double what the Americans have provided. So that's really important to understand. Brussels is apparently testing a new scheme to convert frozen Russian billions into Ukraine reconstruction funds. European Union has discussed this plan that will channel nearly 200 billion euros in frozen Russian assets toward Ukraine's reconstruction as Ukraine confronts an $8 billion or 8 billion euro budget deficit in 2026. So Ukraine is obviously bleeding money, and they are always cap in hand. And if we need to have Ukraine prevailing, then we need to support Ukraine both militarily and financially and in humanitarian ways as well, economically. So that 200 billion euros from frozen Russian assets, that can be utilized in a way. I mean, I've advocated that it's not too bad that they are using the profits from these, because actually that's quite sustainable. I know people have said they need to give out the full $300 billion, but there are apparently legal and other practical issues with doing so. So it's good that the EU is looking at another way around this. But actually, the EU has given Ukraine 10.1 billion euros this year already from frozen Russian assets. So, and if that is a sustainable way of getting money through siphoning off the profits without using the 300 billion euros, and then when it comes to reconstruction, using that for Ukraine's reconstruction, actually that is there's a net gain there, I think. Whereas if you gave Ukraine the full $300 billion now, that would be really good, and they'd be in a really good position now. But that'll be it, and then there's probably going to be legal ramifications and all sorts. But do you know what? There are pros and cons to each way around this. But it's interesting that Europe is looking to other options there concerning that. Now, again, Belgium foreign minister. Belgium seemed to have turned up to the party recently. The Belgian Foreign Minister Maxime Prévost has announced his country will provide Ukraine with a batch of F-16 fighter jets in the coming months. They pledged 30 F-16s by 2028, but none of them have reached Ukraine. Obviously, they need to be, I presume, hopefully upgraded, refurbished, made sure they're fine. But also, they're waiting, I believe, for the F-35s, which are replacing the F-16s. So none have been delivered so far, but it looks like they're going to get them imminently. They're also considering sending troops to Ukraine as part of an international mission after a peace deal. That's their defense minister, Theo Franken. He also announced Belgium will deliver those fighter jets to Ukraine as soon as possible and provide a new 100 million euro, that's $120 million, I think, aid package. So that's really good news. Again, planes going. Remember, the US hasn't provided a single plane, I don't think, for Ukraine, no F-16s. And so, when we have these ideas that I'm just going to refresh a load of these tabs. When you've got these ideas that Ukraine is Europe's responsibility to help Ukraine, that is definitely happening. Belgium pledging that $120 million package with funding going on top of the 1 billion euros. $1.17 billion military aid that Belgium's already delivered, then that's really good news. Now, okay, let's go to what the Americans are doing. But here the US approves $825 million in military sales. So again, they're selling equipment, they're making a profit, and that's that. That is, how much is this the US going out of their way to help Ukraine in a way that they were under the Biden administration? So these are sales of EARM missiles and all the stuff that goes with it. So the US State Department has approved the military sale to Ukraine for extended range attack munitions. These are ones that have been developed, I believe, specifically for Ukraine. Missiles that and the related equipment worth that 825 million. They are getting actually the 3,350 missiles. They have a range of 240 to 450 kilometers. The same number of GPS INS systems with SAASM modules. Package includes containers, pylons, spare parts, mission planning, software, classified and unclassified publications, training, transportation, engineering services, and logistical support. And we understand that though, is coming from Denmark, Netherlands, and Norway. So actually, what we should be doing is there's no congratulations particularly there for the US other than for developing those missiles under the Biden administration and then getting those missiles ready. I presume they were going to give some of them to Ukraine. Now they're selling them, and it's Denmark, the Netherlands, and Norway buying them. So $825 million coming from those three countries. So it's those countries we need to congratulate. So again, this idea that this is Europe's fault and this is your mess and you need to pay for it. Well, actually, it's not our fault. It is a mess on our doorstep. And yet we shrunk our military, but now everyone's turning that around. And every latest figures for NATO is that everyone is at 2%. In fact, I've got that. Let's look. Colby Badwater just did this. Let's bring that in now, right now, actually. Let's get a bit of Colby Badwater. And he did a tweet on how much everyone's spending on NATO going forward. Here it is. So in the 2025 NATO estimate of member defense spending has been published in full. All members except Iceland, which maintains no military, are expected to meet the 2% target. So that's your minimum that was kind of argued for from 2014 under Obama, and several are well on their way to the new 5% target. So the top ones: Poland 4.48%, Lithuania 4%, Latvia 3.373%, Estonia 3.38%, Norway 3.35%, and then the US comes in what is it, 6th position now at 3.22%. But remember, of course, like we talked about before, the US has other things thrown into the mix in their defense spending, such as healthcare for their service personnel, and I think maybe even veterans and their families, where that's just not included in, say, the UK. We have that's the universal healthcare. So they're taking parts of the healthcare budget and putting it into their defense spending. So that 3.22% for the US, I don't know for any other country, but certainly for the US, will be somewhat artificially expanded. So Denmark 3.22% as well. And then you go down to Luxembourg, Spain, Czechia, interestingly, Belgium, North Macedonia, Germany, Portugal. So Germany right down there, although Germany, so I have been arguing, and I don't know if this is part of the new understanding of NATO budgets, but I've been arguing that every bit of help for Ukraine, and you can even argue humanitarian help, because it all goes to the same kind of military prevailing of Ukraine over Russia. I think all of that money should go towards defense expenditure calculations in terms of NATO. Like Germany is spending a phenomenal amount supporting Ukraine. That should go into that. You should put what the US has given to Ukraine previously in that, actually, and that would throw their percentage upwards. And the same with all of these other countries that have supported Ukraine so much. But yeah, there you go. That's your NATO figures. But going back to what we were saying, so Norway, Netherlands, and Denmark, well done for supporting Ukraine in that way. That's excellent, excellent news. But yeah, going back to what Kathy was saying, look, the Europeans are standing up and being counted at the moment. And it's really frustrating to hear that rhetoric from someone that's otherwise very supportive. Now, Ukraine has, and then this is actually more important than you might think. Ukraine has received its first batch of 30 NATO-grade FC.K electronic warfare systems developed by First Contact in partnership with Germany's GSMK, mounted on Kozak armored vehicles. These mobile units are designed to jam Russian drone signals and disrupt control video and telemetry links. Why this is important is that the one area of military support where allies have not helped that much is in terms of electronic warfare, and that's because it's a cutting edge of tech at the moment. And if you start giving that away, like it's giving away an infantry fighting vehicle from the 1990s is no biggie. It's like, yeah, we've got a load of those, you can have them. But the thing that you are just developing right now, and that is at the cutting edge that you would like to use against Russia, and that you have kind of proprietary intellectual property, and you've put a load of money into the development of. That many countries have been a lot more sensitive about that tech and about their developments there, and so they've been very reluctant to give Ukraine the cutting edge of their electronic warfare tech. And that's been frustrating because that's precisely what the Ukrainians need the most, arguably, given the prevalence of drones, right? So to then have 30 NATO bits of EW kit go to Ukraine is indeed important. So Gustav Gressel, who is, I think, an Austrian in Germany, Austrian military man, anyway, says this does not seem spectacular, but it is quite an important bit of news. Counter-drone capabilities are crucial. Getting electronic warfare systems is a big step forward. Some people say, yeah, 3 years too late, but yeah, I think that's like a category change there. That's a real categorically important step for Ukraine to be receiving those. Can I just say, because of my cock up earlier, I don't know if it was Kevin Forst. Let me know in the comments who it was that was very kind with membership gifts in the last stream that went all wrong. Because I'll thank you for that, and thank you, whoever you are. Right, so then this idea that Europe's been stepping up, as I'm claiming, with regard to its military-industrial complex. You look at Rheinmetall. Rheinmetall are all over it at the moment. So, Armin Paprika, the Russians attempted to assassinate him. They had a plan that was foiled, luckily. But he and Rheinmetall have been huge supporters of Ukraine. Rheinmetall opens the largest ammunition plant in Europe, according to Die Welt. The German company Rheinmetall AG has launched a plant in Unterlüß, which will now become the largest artillery shell production facility in Europe. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte attended the official opening. The plant will reach a full capacity in 2027, producing up to 350,000 155mm shells per year. Starting from 2026, the plant will also begin manufacturing rocket artillery. There are plans to build a similar plant in Ukraine to create a pan-European defense ecosystem. And by the way, according to a Fulzer poll, 52% of Germans believe Ukraine should be ready to cede occupied territories for the sake of a peace agreement. Well, that's something else entirely. We'll get onto that maybe on another video. So yeah, that's excellent news for Rheinmetall there. Speaking of those ERAM earlier, Michael Gowdy was saying right at the top of the thread, US may deliver, according to CNN, the long-range ERAM missiles to Ukraine by the end of this year. That will be super, super good. Yeah, and oh, goodness me, yeah, Tulsi Gabbard has accidentally, or maybe on purpose, unveiled the identity of a classified CIA agent working undercover in Russia. So Tulsi Gabbard is an absolute fool. Yes. So let's move on from Rheinmetall to KNDS Deutschland. So German Aid to Ukraine says, when asked about my June 2025 coverage of the delay of the RCH 155's deployment in Ukraine, KNDS Deutschland CEO Ralph Ketzel provided insight into the current progress in an interview with the Ukrainian version of Deutsche Welle. So the RCH 155 is this bit of kit. This is replacing, in the UK, it's replacing the AS90. We gave all of our self-propelled howitzers, the AS90s, to Ukraine, all of them. You have Denmark's given all of their self-propelled artillery to Ukraine, and they are, I presume, going forward are going to, because what they gave were the Caesars they had ordered from France as well, and they ended up going straight to Ukraine. I presume they'll get Caesars in, but we're getting in the UK the RCH 155. Now this is a co-production between the UK and Germany. Well, it's a German piece of kit, but I think we're localizing it for the UK, some of it in the UK. Anyway, it's on the Boxer chassis. It's RCH stands for remote controlled howitzer. So this is in the future deemed to be a vehicle that will be able to be used remotely. Now it will only have 2 crew, I believe. So this is already, harnessing technology, replacing people with tech, which is good news in terms of armed forces. Obviously Ukraine, fewer people to operate these things are better, and then you can have more soldiers, more drone operators, whatever. But eventually it will become remotely controlled. Ukraine has received one of these that they're using for training at the moment, at least one, and they are due to receive a bunch more that were ordered some time back, and people going, what are you doing ordering stuff in 2022 for Ukraine for 2025? It turns out that Germany was actually quite prescient and quite thoughtful there, because 2025 has come along, and receiving these things now is actually a good thing. It's like, yeah, I'm happy you did put in that. Whereas at the time, people were saying, no, they need stuff now, but they needed stuff now, and they needed stuff going forward consistently. Anyway, briefly in advance, there are still none of these artillery systems delivered yet. In more detailed tests and training on the system led to several changes being implemented into the system. According to Ketzel, there are still a few technical issues that KNDS is resolving in dialogue with Ukraine. He also mentioned that the RCH 155 still needs to be integrated into the Ukrainian combat management system. If KNDS Deutschland resolves all issues, the first systems are scheduled to be delivered in the coming months. The original plan was to deliver 6 RCH 155s to Ukraine in 2025, with a further 48 to be delivered in the following years. And I think with each of these, do you get some kind of fire control vehicle that also goes alongside each 9? Is it each 9 of them? I think there were 54, and I think there'll be 6 fire control vehicles and 9 howitzers to go alongside that. Anyway, yeah, there you go. Thanks for that, German Aid to Ukraine. So Czech volunteer initiative, Darek Propatina, has delivered a Black Hawk UH-60 helicopter. So there's a couple of these already in Ukraine used by the special forces. So they've obviously been able to find privately a Black Hawk helicopter, and entirely through private donations, they've funded the acquisition of this helicopter in order to get it to Ukraine. Now the Czechs do this quite a bit. At the moment, they're also fundraising for training planes, I presume, to be used in the new training facility in Czechia that Ukrainian pilots are utilizing. But yeah, they have also, it's the Slovakians that were raising money privately for artillery ammunition that they were buying themselves. So anyway, right, just before we go on to what Ukraine are doing indigenously, let's have a little look at some numbers. And I'm glad I came across this today, because I've been wanting to know how many combat planes the Ukrainians have. So from 2021 to 2025, the combat aircraft fleet of the Ukrainian Air Force grew from 98 to 159, despite losing about 69 units in battles. Combat aircraft fleet in 2021, according to Flight Global's World Air Forces 2022. At the end of 2021, the active fleet of combat aircraft in the Ukrainian Air Force included 43 MiG-29s, 26 Su-27s, 17 Su-25s, 12 Su-24s, making a total of 98 combat aircraft. And then in 2025, according to open source data, including Jane's, they had 54 MiG-29 so that's an increase in those. 19 Su-25, so they lost. Oh no, they gained a couple of Su-25s. 13 Su-24s, so gained one there. 41 F-16, 5 Mirage 2000s, making a total of 159 combat aircraft. So interesting that all of those Sus went up marginally, considering they are the ones they were losing. They were obviously repurposing older ones and refurbishing and scraping and scrimping and scraping and getting them from here, there, and everywhere. And that's those numbers include those losses of 69 aircraft, so approximately 62 in 2022, including 30 MiG-29s, 15 Su-27s, 12 Su-25s, and 5 Su-24s. So in 2023 to 2025, about 7 aircraft have been lost, 2 F-16s and 1 Mirage 2000. F-16, one was shot down, was it? I thought they were both lost by mistake, but one was shot down. 4 Su-27s, 1 Su-25, and 1 Su-24. So that's really impressive that Ukraine have gone from like 98 aircraft with losses up to 159. I think that's phenomenal. And I go to bed dreaming of getting more aircraft. So I'm hoping that there'll be more Mirages. I think there are more Mirages due anyway, but it's whether France can get even more than they have pledged. And there's some grey area around how many they've pledged and what Ukraine are going to receive in terms of Mirages. But the French were looking into whether they could get more, maybe from, I think some of the Middle Eastern countries operate the Mirage 2000. And then, of course, Gripen. Let's get some Gripen out there. And then F-16s. They have, as we heard, they haven't received a single Belgian F-16 yet. And if they are on the way imminently, they pledged 30 Belgian F-16s. Then suddenly you're up to, and this is what I was telling you the other day, like if you've suddenly got another 70 aircraft, as long as you've got the pilots, then you could, and you've got the munitions to go with them, you can start hammering the front line with guided glide bombs willy-nilly. And that is how the Russians succeeded in dislodging the Ukrainians from places like Avdiivka. Really important. I think this area, this domain is one of the, I think, the most important for Ukraine to receive considerable assistance with. I would love to see like the US give 30 F-16s, and you can even play around with Super Hornets or the Hornet, the FA-18. You got all these different options, but certainly I'd like to see Gripen and more F-16s and more Mirages there. Thank you very much. But that's just a wishful shopping list, isn't it? Right, okay. We're now going to move on to Ukrainian stuff. Just before I do so, because I need to just refresh everything, I'm going to say thank you to all of you who are hanging out here. Thanks to Scruffy Tales for being in the chat. I watched your video this morning, actually, on the latest going on in Pokrovsk. If you haven't subscribed to Scruffy Tales, please do so. He's a really good mapper that goes into a lot more detail than I have time to do these days. And he was talking about how there could be this option for the Ukrainians in the Pokrovsk region, in this small village called Myrna they've attacked to, although the Russians are trying to counterattack, as I updated on my mapping update last night. The Ukrainians are also securing that area. And if they can succeed there and then, cut down from the top and up from the bottom, they could cut the Russians off in that Pokrovsk axis where they had attacked and got deep behind the Ukrainian lines. They could cut that entire sector off. But it depends, you would need to pile a lot of resources and troops into that area to do so. It's not easy, but it's doable. But the question is, what do the Ukrainians have in reserve? What are they willing to commit? We heard today. So Zelensky has just announced. In fact, I think I have this here because I thought, oh, that's interesting. Random Zelensky thing to say. Let's see if I have that here. Zelensky's warned that, oh no, you don't have it there. Zelensky's warned that Russia is amassing significant airborne forces in the Zaporizhia region, calling the situation very dangerous. He added that the war will end in one format or another as Putin has no way out. But Zaporizhia, yeah, that's a worry. And I wonder if he's talking about Kamyanska. I wonder if, Scruffy, that you would agree with this, because the Russians are moving up bit by bit up that Zaporizhia, and I'll show you on a map later, but moving up the Zaporizhia reservoir on that easterly side of it. And that gets them closer and closer to Zaporizhia city. And then they can get close enough to start bombarding it with artillery. And that is a huge issue for the Ukrainians. So if he's worried about that, he's probably right to be. If the Ukrainians are looking at Russians amassing at Kamyanska at the side of that reservoir, then that is a really big problem, because of course you've already got all the issues around Kupiansk and Pokrovsk. So it's just another mold to play whack-a-mole with. But anyway, be interested to see what you have to say, Scruffy, if you are indeed still in the chat. I see you're talking about CV90s and whatnot. The Swedes obviously have been helping with combat boats and archers, the self-propelled gun that the Swedes provide, NLAWs, bonus rounds, CV90 40Cs, Barracuda camouflage. So that's a camouflage around their CV90s that is really decent. I think it might have thermal imagery capabilities and whatnot. Plan to give Ukraine the latest version of the CV90. Wow. And so what we also hear, by the way, in CV90 news is that BAE Systems that makes the CV90 is just starting to, I think they've got the first CV90 going to Czechia. And then I think they're going to build 39 out of like 240 or something like that of them in Sweden before the rest of them are built localized in Czechia. Why is that relevant to Ukraine? Well, extra capacity for building machines like this in Europe, which is what they're doing in getting them built in Czechia as well, will mean that if Ukraine wants CV90s, or if nations are willing to get them CV90s, then there's kind of more option there. Yes, so in the Zaporizhia direction, they seem to follow the shoreline to advance through the smaller towns, and that's a problem because they are continuing to do so. Anyway, good to have everyone on board. Aussie Bugger. Lots of people talk about the A-10. So the A-10, the Warthog plane, is this plane that people say that it would be really useful. Some are saying it would be really useful to actually shoot down the Shahed drones, others to bomb areas. But in order to kind of carpet bomb with A-10s, you need complete air supremacy, because these are very vulnerable to getting shot down. So you'd only want those in certain circumstances. But then they get pretty obsolete these days, and it could be that Ukraine could get a load of them relatively easily. So it's about looking to see what what different nations can get to Ukraine without complicating issues, because Ukraine has the challenge of operating so many different bits of kit and having to train on them, having the logistics footprints for each bit of kit, and each of them has a challenge with getting spare parts and whatnot. That the more varied kit you have, the more problematic that becomes. Sweden and the Netherlands are cooperating to build 200 CV90 35s for Ukraine. It's the newest, most advanced CV90. That's a good bit of knowledge there. So that's really cool. I mean, that's the thing that's missing for the Ukrainians in terms of their own manufacturing. Infantry fighting vehicles, they've got MRAPs and APCs and whatnot, but infantry fighting vehicles, the Germans were supposed to be building the Lynx in Ukraine, but that doesn't seem to have happened. And then tanks. If they can get them built in the Netherlands and Sweden, then good stuff. As Aussie Burger says, the A-10 won't survive on the front lines. Yeah. So I forgot to actually read that part of what he said out. Right. Okay. Let's now go back to where I was. I'm going to have a quick swig of Yorkshire tea, which is unsuitably lukewarm now. Just it's not good enough, is it? Right. Okay. So what's Ukraine doing inside Ukraine with regard to their own military Equipment. Ukraine's war-driven defense tech boom is rewriting procurement. Startups deliver drones in weeks, factories in months, and feedback comes daily from the front. But EU bureaucracy blocks access even as Ukraine runs at 55% capacity. Now, I haven't read this yet, and I probably should go and read this. It's going to be a fairly lengthy Euromaidan press article, no doubt. So I'm not going to do it now, but there you can go and check that out. Ukraine has been reinventing, I think, procurements, and you have this issue that still exists with things like drones. So we raised $15,000 for Bogdan at Kopternia for his drone lab to get like $250 drones to the front line relatively easy. Now, okay, they're not, that's volunteer, so they're not making a profit. But if you were doing that and trying to turn a profit, that $250 drone, I don't know, it might be like a $500 drone or something like that. And Ukraine, that's how Ukraine are fighting, and that's how they are procuring equipment and building stuff, and also working in unison with the units, so they know what the units need, so they're not providing units with stuff that's effectively useless. As apparently we're hearing some of the drones that are coming from outside of Ukraine now are. So by the time the Ukrainians are getting those drones, they're kind of obsolete. But countries like the US are still, you're looking at the war in Ukraine saying, yeah, that's brilliant, they're doing that, and then going back and then still going through this old school procurement process where they're ordering drones for like $70,000 or something. And you're like, no, this war is telling you that you should be doing it like this. And there was a video of the British training the other day, running behind an infantry fighting vehicle, blah, blah, blah. And someone was commenting that this is absolutely ridiculous. There's not a drone in sight. You just wouldn't be fighting on a modern battlefield without drones. So what are the British doing? Training. So, there's so many opportunities to learn from this war. And the Ukrainians are teaching us so much. And sometimes we're just refusing to learn. And that could be because actually within procurement for militaries, things are just so established, and you have these big companies that make lots of money and everything's really expensive, and that's the way ever it shall be. But actually what you really need is a live and very reactive procurement process and innovation process where you can react to what's going on the front lines and get stuff to the front lines as quick as possible, because you know what, you're at war. So anyway, just a little sidebar there. Now we're going to talk about the Flamingo. So this is a Flamingo. There's a nice bit of cutaway there. So it's on the image for the video, the thumbnail. This is H.I. Sutton. Go and check his work out. He's great. Usually does a lot of stuff in maritime covert shores, but occasionally does, because he does these MS Paint cutaways. He's just taken time to do it for the Flamingo. So the Flamingo here is this new 3,000 kilometer range, 1,150 kilogram payload. I think they're using an old Soviet era bomb effectively and turning it into this big cruise missile, and it looks something like that. So you've got, you can go and look at the legend at the side there. And find out what all the parts of the missile are. But that is your Flamingo. What's he say? The FP5 Flamingo marks a significant increase in the range and payload of Ukraine's deep strike capability. While one-way attack drones have so far only reached 2,000 kilometers, the FP5 promises 3,000. This places numerous additional strategic targets at threat. Similarly, its warhead is around 10 to 20 times larger than other types. Now, certain targets, such as a sprawling drone factories too large for smaller drone warheads, can potentially be tackled. This has been announced with great fanfare, hasn't it? Well, The Economist has an article. Ukraine's Flamingo missile with a 3,000 kilometer range is now in serial production, according to The Economist. Development took 9 months after the US refused Tomahawk supplies. So they weren't going to get Tomahawks from the US, and so they thought, right, in that case, we've got to make our own. If you want a job doing well, you've got to do it yourself. So each missile costs under 1 million euros, experts estimate. We also have a breakdown of this article by Timothy Milovanov. So let's go into that. Flamingo's missile, its untested performance and high cost do raise doubts, though, about its ability to deliver the strategic impact Ukraine needs. Yet Ukraine has shown it can rapidly develop weapons threatening Russia, showcasing remarkable wartime innovation. According to The Economist, Ukraine revealed the Flamingo cruise missile with a 3,000-kilometer range and 1+ ton payload. Developed in just 9 months by a team with no prior defense experience, officials say they were initially skeptical but stunned on seeing the missile firsthand. The Flamingo began as a napkin scribble in late 2024 after the US denied Zelensky's request for Tomahawks, inspired by V1 and Strige designs. Its engine sits above the body. Assembler FP5 appeared at a UAE show. Link to Firepoint, though, is unclear. Flamingo production is over 90% complete at secret dispersed Ukrainian sites, with some work abroad. Its fiberglass body improves stealth versus metal missiles. The AI-25 turbofan engine from Motor Sich in Zaporizhia, often attacked, poses production bottlenecks, though. Current Flamingo production is 1 per day, aiming for 7 daily by October 2025. Competitors question its authenticity, citing ties to the presidential office, non-competitive financing, and origin doubts. At $1 million each, it's globally competitive but costly for Ukraine. Flamingo's bulky design and steep launch make it radar visible, with high expected interception rates. Aviation expert Krivolap believes it can still exploit gaps in Russia's weakening air defenses using creative combined attack tactics. Okay, so this is a mixed bag of nuts, and we're going to talk about corruption in a second. But this is a mixed bag of nuts because this is a big old missile that, even though it's predominantly made of fiberglass, it's going to be detectable and easily intercepted, although it's going to travel at quite a pace. But in principle, this shouldn't be too difficult to intercept. And it's not massively cheap. It's still $1 million a pop or thereabouts. And while that is actually cheaper than any other equivalent abroad, for Ukraine, that's quite a cost, right? And if you're going to intercept 50, 60, 80, I don't know what percent of these get intercepted, then actually it's not $1 million a pop. It's like $7 million a pop, right? So you got to understand the cost of these in terms of, you know, although each one of those will be stucking away an interceptor, which will, you know, so you can offset the cost down the cost of to the Russians, but simply speaking, you know, it depends on the interception rate, but these are going to be a lot more expensive than you would otherwise like. But a lot of people are getting excited about the Flamingo because these are made by the Ukrainians and therefore they can be used anywhere that the Ukrainians deem appropriate. Now, Ukraine's anti-corruption agency has been investigating the country's star deep strike drone company, Firepoint. So over concerns it misled the government on pricing and deliveries, 5 sources with knowledge of the investigation told the Kyiv Independent. So some are now saying that actually this was announced with all sorts of fanfare precisely because it was being investigated. I think, no, we have, where is John Ridge here? So John Ridge, who's a kind of missile expert associated with Tuchny, said, my understanding is Firepoint, the company behind it, staged the reveal of Flamingo to divert attention from NABU's ongoing investigation and possibly provoke intervention from the presidential office. So Ukraine's anti-corruption agency has been investigating the country's star deep strike drone company over concerns it misled the government on pricing deliveries. That's what I said. There's also something else to do with there's some connection with the presidential office as well with the company that I saw somewhere else, but I haven't got that here. So yeah, will it be the magic, the wonder weapon that many people are hoping it will be? Almost certainly not. I think it's probably too big and cumbersome for that. Will it be a useful addition to the inventory? Almost certainly, but it depends on how many they can produce and what the interception rates are like and how cheap they are, and whether they have been trying to the makers have been trying to diddle the Ukrainian government or whatever. I don't know. yet to be seen. And then as soon as I was kind of hearing about the FP5, I was wondering, actually, are the Germans behind this? Because we had heard so much that the Germans were going to be funding this new set of distance weapons from the Ukrainians, or some distance capability from the Ukrainians. But the received wisdom there was they were funding loitering drones, and these are drones that Ukraine had already manufactured an awful lot of these, and they've been used to some success. And the Germans might well have been funding them. We just don't quite know. German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has said Berlin is, quote, very satisfied with how cooperation with Kyiv is progressing on the production of long-range weapons in Ukraine, financed by Germany. So I'd absolutely be fascinated to know, exactly what the Germans are funding. Are they funding anything from Firepoint, the FP1 and the FP5? We saw the FP1, which looks like a loitering drone. And I say this stuff as if you all know what I'm talking about, but maybe some of you don't. So the loitering drone looks like this, and it has a landing gear, and it takes off from a runway. So that's what the loitering looks like. Okay. And it's got this V-shaped tail. There you go. Oh no, that's a Bayraktar one. So that's it there. There's a loitering. So you can see that's a V-shaped tail and two tails that connect it. Then we saw one that looked like that with no landing gear, and everyone's like, oh, it's like a loitering, but with no landing gear. But the FP1, that's the FP1 drone. So they are using the FP1. It was used at least the other day to strike one of the let's see if we can find that, to strike one of the, it's not there. Yeah. One of the hydrocarbon facilities. And, they're like, that's a loitering drone without the landing gear, because it gets kind of launched from an angled, launcher. Are the Germans helping to produce the FP1? What exactly is it that they are funding? I am desperate to know. But apparently Boris Pistorius is happy with that. Okay. Now we're going to go on to see, who's popping. This is a very positive appraisal. I think the Flamingo is going to slap. I think Ukraine will use them cleverly and wisely, says who's popping. I think they'll use them as wisely as possible, but it really does depend on interception rates for them. But I guess what they're doing now maybe is firing all sorts of stuff into Russia and trying to work out, as the Russians have done with the Ukrainians, trying to work out the safest passages. That I have long been saying that I think the Russians have been improving in their interception rates of Ukrainian drones, and you would imagine that they would have to improve, because there's only so many places that Ukrainian drones can come across the border, right, into Russia to go on their runs to attack all of the places that they are attacking inside Russia. So it shouldn't be too difficult to line up your air defenses across the major places where the Ukrainian drones are going to be crossing the border. So I'm fairly sure the Russians have been improving their interception rates, and any new weapon is going to be evaluated on its success rate, which is both kind of being electronic warfare resilient and air defense resilient as well. Now, going back to the threads here, the ending of the Mavic 3 production in favor of the Mavic 4. So these are the DJI drones from China. They've had the Mavic 3s being used as reconnaissance drones and often like IED dropping drones, and they are one of the mainstays of both sides' drone inventories. But the company is now replacing the Mavic 3 with a Mavic 4, and this has adversely affected both sides in Ukraine. So Ukrainian electronic warfare expert Serhiy Flash Bekrestinov reviews the prospects for the Mavic 4. Quote, both we and the Russians lost a lot of DJI drones due to electronic warfare. The Russians write their own firmware 1001 for Mavics, not without help from the Chinese, and we use it too. Thanks to this firmware, Mavics no longer fall under electronic warfare, but fly upwards, searching for a stable signal from the operator. So in other words, this isn't something that these drones come with out of the box. So the Russians and the Ukrainians, but the Russians with the help of Chinese, write new kind of software, firmware for the software that goes on the hardware for the Mavics 3. And one of the things that it now does is when the signal is lost due to interference from electronic warfare, rather than kind of falling out the sky or whatever, or going, falling, it automatically just flies upwards. So it loses contact with the operator. It flies upwards and therefore out of the range of the electronic warfare, and then into the range or back into solid connection to the operator. And then the operator can move the drone elsewhere or react accordingly. But of course, now that the Mavic 4s have come out, then that firmware that worked for the Mavic 3 does not work for the Mavic 4. And so now they can't get the Mavic 3s, they stopped making them. Then this is providing a bit of an issue because the new Mavic 4s will just fall out the sky when they get interfered with. So the operator then brings the drone back home. Losses of the Mavics are then minimized. But the DJI recently announced the release of the 4th generation of drones for which there are no 1001 firmware and no magical electronic warfare countermeasures. Production of the 3rd series has been discontinued. It seemed bad, but the 4th series has implemented a return to home function based on a visual map of the area. The 3rd version had it, but in a primitive form. So that's interesting. So the 4th series now has its own inbuilt return to home. We are waiting for the 1001 firmware for the 4th series, studying the capabilities of visual return based on the terrain. And meanwhile, we return to the old ideas of additional coordinate correction boards. So they then have to add other boards, electronic boards into the drone to make sure that they're not losing it. So just thought I'd throw that one in there. The Ukrainian General Staff has released photos of a previously unseen domestically produced drone in Ukraine, now confirmed to be in serial production. Judging by its size and nose design, it appears to be a middle strike loitering munition similar to the Israeli Harop drone. So here's some images. That's what it looks like in broken form as it's come to the ground. There have been, I did a thread this morning on my hits and losses video, if you haven't already seen that, of a complaint from some that the Ukrainians are spending arguably too much money and resources on long range capabilities like the drones we've just been talking about previously, the FP1s and the loiters and all that, and not enough on medium range drones, so 50 to 200 kilometers back behind the front lines. The Russians have had the Lancet, they've got the Molnier, they've got a bunch of options that the Ukrainians have been trying to match. So they have the Ram 2, they've got equivalents to the Lancet, but it appears that the Russians still, have the asymmetrical advantage there in terms of those medium range drones. And that thread was moaning about how the Ukrainians need to put more effort into the 50 to 200 kilometer range, and it wouldn't surprise me. So then we come to this, right? Russians are complaining that Ukraine have begun actively using the Ram 2X loitering munitions, aka the Ukrainian Lancet, with a range of up to 150 kilometers when paired with a relay. For the past week, they've been striking targets ranging from Russian military trains to individual vehicles, and I showed you this video the other day. So good news that the Ukrainians are at least using some medium range drones, kamikaze drones effectively. And there are others other than the Ram. I mean, there was the Ram. Who makes the Ram? Is it Poland or I don't know? But anyway, there were Ram. Maybe it's the Ukrainians themselves. There was a Ram 1.0 way back, like a couple of years back in the war, and we heard a little bit about it. But obviously they've updated that. Right, and then we see this imagery coming from Roy, Ukrainian fiber optic FPV with a fiber spool labeled 60 kilometers. And that is absolutely incredible. So when I was out in Kiev last time, I met up with James from Y in Ukraine. He's now with another unit in Ukraine. And he was looking, he brought with him a couple of spools. One was a 5-kilometer spool, one was a 10-kilometer spool, or was it a 10 and 20, something like that. And, these are pretty sizable bits of kit. 60-kilometer spool, pretty impressive. The Russians refused to believe that this much fiber cable was actually carried, considering it a ruse to induce them to push artillery further back from the front lines. But one assumes, I mean, that's a pretty big spool there. One assumes that that's correct, and they can now go to 60 kilometers, which is a phenomenal range for a drone, an FPV's type drone to go to. Right, okay, we're going to go on just a very short bit on security guarantees. But before we do that, let's just say hello to you guys and say a big thank you. F Oink, legend. Appreciate that. Only redeemable in the little whiskey shop. Thank you for that. I'll put it to good use. So thank you. I really appreciate your Hungarian love there. Thank you probably to Kevin Forst, I would have thought, on the first video that went a bit wrong. So thank you, Kevin. You probably gave some memberships out there. So appreciate that. We have, who's popping? Have you seen the US, UK, Norway military operations to locate a Russian sub? Been at it since last Sunday with 24 sorties over the Norwegian Sea. I have. I've seen some flight radar paths of flights that are going round and round in circles over the sea trying to find this thing. I talked about this the other day in terms of the Russians annoying the Americans. So there's supposedly a submarine threat on the American carrier. The what's the name? Was it the? No, it wasn't the Gerald Ford or USS. Anyway, it was a USS carrier that was threatened supposedly by a sub. And I was saying, look, for the Russians, it's a bit silly. If I was the Russians, I'd be like, right, Trump is kind of on our side. Let's just keep manipulating him, keep him on our side. Don't piss off the Americans. You then go and do something like that and threaten an American aircraft carrier, then it just gives Trump permission to get angry with the Russians and side more with the Ukrainians. So sometimes I don't understand the Russians. They make some really weird decisions that I think are counterproductive. If you were, say, Putin trying to win, right? Obviously, I'm not that, and I'm happy that they do make those silly decisions sometimes. But that apparently is still ongoing. So thanks, who's popping. Appreciate that, mate. Johnny Nebregard, thank you, my good man. Appreciate your Norwegian love. And Zeb Carter here gifting 5 memberships. So thank you very much, Zeb, for your support as well. To Noel Grace with a super sticker. Thank you, Noel. Super, super generous of you. Da Vinci, who is just a total legend and has a hoodie just like this one in grey, because I've seen a picture of it. Totally cool. Could the Flamingo be a message to Trump? Help us now or we will help ourselves and you won't be the hero. Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't think it's intended to be such. It's like Tomahawk, can't have a Tomahawk. We need to make this. So they made that. So the decision was 9 months ago, I presume, before Trump was in office. So, I guess that's why they built it. But it would also help with messaging, I guess, as well. And Niels Clement says, well, I say thank you to Niels for gifting 10 ATP Geopolitics memberships. That's really, really generous. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so we're going to go back to one of our penultimate sections here. This is on security guarantees. Thank you for the thanks, Cheryl. Oh, no, not Cheryl. Mattis Tips. Or is that Matty Stips? Or is that Mattist Ips? Who knows? Or is it? Oh, whatever. Thank you, JP, for the ongoing tireless reporting and finding all the nuggets. You're a hero too. I don't think so, but thank you. Appreciate that. Okay. Right. We'll go to the security guarantees. I don't have too much on the security guarantees. It's all ongoing. Conversations still taking place. Trump wants Europe to send troops to Ukraine after a peace deal, but public opinion says no. So Germany, France, and Poland face strong resistance at home. Even scaled down plans face backlash as leaders wait for the US guarantees before committing boots to the ground. So there's a real issue here. So, Poland and Germany, and I've not seen the the French stats for this, but I've seen the German and Polish ones, that they're not fans of sending troops. And of course, you know, if the nations are worried about public sentiments and therefore are either going to scale it back or not do it, then that's a real issue for Ukraine, because they desperately need security guarantees. But like I've said to you before, the best security guarantee is just joining NATO. I don't understand. Like, even like if Trump's going to get annoyed because there are no security guarantees, and without security guarantees, you're not going to have peace, Trump might be forced to just turn around and say, well, they can join NATO. The problem is, if that's the case, Putin would probably not agree to any peace guarantees then. So we wonder why we're still at this stage where no one can agree anything. It's because I'm guessing it's maybe unsolvable, this situation, until one side has completely capitulated. Like, this is why, for me, it's so important that the Russian economy is in a shambles, that it collapses, because that will force Russia to have to concede. Really, one side is going to have to concede, right? We don't want Ukraine to concede, but without anything changing massively, so just keeping as it is, the war will continue ad infinitum, and no one will concede anything. And Trump will get really frustrated and probably try and blame Zelensky. Europe will then go, it's not Zelensky's fault, it's Russia's fault, and then we're back at square one. So we really, really need Russia's economy, in my opinion, to collapse. That is now officially cold tea. Yeah. Right, so Zelensky's dismissed EU proposals. So there's been these proposals, here it is. European leaders are weighing the creation of a 40-kilometer buffer zone between the Russian and Ukrainian front lines as part of a peace deal, according to Politico. It's unclear Kyiv would accept the plan, as it would likely come with territorial concessions. The number of service members needed to patrol the border also remains a concern. Officials are discussing from 4,000 to around 60,000 troops. French and British forces will likely make up the core of the foreign troop presence. Countries are lobbying other allies to help provide military assets, and that actually includes the Belgians. So Belgium, like I've already reported, Belgium is ready to send troops to Ukraine after a ceasefire. So that's really good to hear that from their Foreign Minister Prévost. And then we hear Zelensky's dismissed EU proposals for a 40 to 100 kilometer buffer zone, saying modern warfare makes such concepts meaningless since heavy weapons and drones already strike at long range. He added that if Russia wants more distance, it can retreat deeper into occupied territories. If you want more distance from us, you can bugger off back to Russia. Now, talking about, I was going to be inappropriate. Mind you, why not, to the Russian Foreign Ministry? So their spokesman, Makarova, has said a peaceful settlement should include demilitarization, denazification, as well as a neutral, non-aligned and non-nuclear status for Ukraine. Russian side demands recognition of territorial realities and ensuring the rights of the Russian-speaking population. So we're just back to the maximalist demands. Although we heard this morning that, and this comes from the Turkish foreign minister, that the Russians are ready to freeze the front lines. Is it freeze the front lines in Zaporizhia and Kherson, maybe even give them back and have 20 to 30, or freeze them, no, and have 20 to 35% of Donetsk, which is actually moving back in Donetsk. So I don't know. Then there are other claims that they would keep the whole of Donbass and Crimea, but pull out of Zaporizhia and Kherson, which is broadly what I suggested would probably happen about 2 years ago, is that the Russians would say, right, we want de jure. So in other words, we want it to be internationally recognized that Russia controls Crimea and the Donbass. And then we'll just thank you very much, we'll leave everywhere else. And it wouldn't surprise me that after all these years, that's eventually where we'll get to and what the Russians would accept. Okay, now we're going to just pop into a couple to do with how Russia are doing. Right. So we heard, I reported the other morning, yesterday morning, I think, that this new Grand 2 drone, jet drone, Grand 3, sorry, jet drone has, one had been, I believe, shot down in Kiev, has had on board the power unit of the PBS TJ40G2 engine, producing 400 newtons of thrust, manufactured by PBS Velko Pitez in the Czech Republic. And then a Chinese origin, other ones, they also use Chinese origin engines too. But anyway, we heard that, and then the company has responded. So according to PBS Velko Pitez company, the engine was apparently a Chinese unlicensed copy of their product. But to be sure, they will send their representatives to check the wreckage. Iran and China have been making unlicensed copies of these engines for a long time. That wouldn't surprise me. I don't think intellectual property means an awful lot to the Chinese in this context, and they're there to easily just rip off other engines and produce them and give, sell them to the Russians. We hear, I don't know the provenance of this claim, but somebody sent me this Pentanet, said RKK Energia. So this is Energia is one of the military industrial facilities that has been hit recently. I say recently, maybe 6 weeks ago or something, and a number of times. I think it was hit several times in a row. Anyway, RKK Energia, which developed key Soviet rockets, including Vostok and Soyuz, has reported a critical financial situation. The CEO, Igor Maltsev, has stated that the company is on the verge of closure due to the huge debts and inefficiency. Quote, saving the company is a task bordering on a miracle. I said to you the other day with that video of the guy from the Typhoon military facility, the military factory, saying, I'm being paid for 2 months, please bomb. So he's saying to the Ukrainians, and using a slur for Ukrainians, so he's clearly not pro-Ukrainian, saying, please bomb our factory because I haven't been paid for 2 months. You have the big drone manufacturer, the manufacturer of big drones. I'm not saying the company's massive, but like, was it the Orion drones and whatnot? They Kronstadt, I think is going under. It's in debt massively. Well, I don't understand how Russia has these big military concerns that are struggling financially when they're on a war footing, and the government should be throwing money at them, I presume. But then clearly the government doesn't have the money to throw at them. And this goes back to, we need to see the collapse of the Russian economy. And then you're talking about canaries in the coal mine. This is one of them. If you've got in military industrial concerns going under in the middle of a war when they should be at their most, productive, you've got problems. I think Russia have problems. The Russian Rubicon drone unit has successfully copied Ukraine's Sky Hunter system of radio receivers and tactical radars to locate reconnaissance drones and vector-in fighter FPVs. Targeting these radars is vital to prevent heavy losses of these critical Ukrainian drones. But first, the radars must be located. Serhiy Flash expects the Chinese tactical radars with 10 to 15 kilometer range, such as the YFR-02 phased array series, are the most likely being used. He urges Ukrainian drone teams to search for their distinctive 1 meter wide rectangular shapes. So the Russians are coming up with counter drone tech, and Ukrainian drone crews might need to increase the point value of those bits of kit so that their drone teams are incentivized to take them out. Right, and then lastly, we have a bit of a thread here, just seeing how long it is. Yeah, that's not too bad. So we're going to go through a Tatarigami thread here on North Korea, really. So drones, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, communications, battlefield awareness, electronic warfare, and mobile anti-tank systems. North Korea appears to have taken notes from the battlefield of Kursk. Its latest propaganda video offers clues front intelligence insight finds in its newest analysis. When North Korean forces arrived in Kursk in the latter half of 2024, they entered a war already deep into its drone phase. Adapting to this reality required 3 urgent adjustments: countermeasures, offensive drone tactics, and battlefield surveillance. In a 19-minute video released by Korean television, Central Television, an FPV drone team, a pilot and a co-pilot, is shown striking Ukrainian vehicles in Kursk Oblast. The wiring setup suggests a reconnaissance unit with quadcopters was likely operating from the same building. The footage showed mobile ATGMs, anti-tank guided missiles, mounted on light pickup trucks using an optical sensor for real-time guidance. The system seemed to be capable of to conduct top attack strikes. The adaptation signals Pyongyang's intent to field mobile, low-cost and modern anti-armor solutions. Now, what's interesting here is we were talking earlier on about how the US and other nations are struggling to react quickly enough to what's going on in Ukraine. North Korea, they've had troops in the mix, and so there's that feedback that's even more immediate, but they appear to be adapting right off the bat. Thank you very much. And even making some of these pieces of equipment themselves, like sending 25,000 people to work at Yelabuga, as is the plan, supposedly, to have them go back to Pyongyang and work building equivalent drones back in North Korea. How reactive are we in the West? Now, the good thing for particularly European supporters of Ukraine is that they have these capability coalitions. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but are the US not in any capability coalitions? They seem to be a European thing, where we have these groups. So the UK is in charge of the maritime coalition with Norway. It's in charge of the drone coalition with Latvia. And that means you get these companies, you get these companies, you get these nations who want to support Ukraine in certain domains, like France with the artillery one, and they bring their expertise to that coalition. They work to supply Ukraine with a bunch of stuff, working together, stimulating their own economy, but they're also getting really good feedback from the Ukrainians, because the Ukrainians will be working with them, saying, well, we need this, we need that, we need this, they need to look like that. That is a form of reactive innovation and production and procurement that is probably very, very good. And then, for example, with drones, I presume the UK then is procuring those drones that are coming out of the war in Ukraine from the capability coalition for their own armed forces. So there is, but I wonder if the US is not part of any of the capability coalitions. Am I right in thinking that? Then they're obviously not getting that feedback, and I don't think they're learning as much. You've got to be in for a penny, in for a pound. None of these capability coalitions are free lunches. There's no such thing as a free lunch with the war in Ukraine. Everyone helps Ukraine because it's strategically important. They help Ukraine and they get a benefit from it. So if you're in a capability coalition, you're in it because you get a benefit for your own armed forces, your own economy, your own industry, and innovation. And so you get the best weapons for your army. So when your army or Air Force or Navy are in the next conflict, you are tooled up because you've learned from Ukraine and you've helped Ukraine to help yourself. So anyway, to go back to the thread, the video also showed the better known Bullseye 2, or possibly the Bullseye 3, North Korea's version of the Soviet 9K-111 anti-tank guided missile with an effective range of 2.5 kilometers. It's far shorter range than newer systems. Notably, the Bullseye 2 has already been documented in the hands of Hamas. So that's about half the range of like the Javelin Endor type thing, but probably a fraction of the price. Another notable moment, North Korean troops were seen using the Russian-made Azart tactical radio, a 6th generation handheld with digital modes, frequency hopping, and GPS GLONASS synchronization. This indicates Pyongyang may have a deeper understanding of the practical role of comms in modern warfare. We also noted North Korea command posts using mapping software paired with live drone streaming interfaces, creating a makeshift functional battlefield awareness system. Ukrainians very successfully using their own Delta system to do that. The propaganda video also highlighted infantry fire support, Type 75, 107mm multiple launch rocket launchers, which we've seen in Ukraine. Actually, a number of them being taken out recently. And light mortars backing infantry. The Type 75, a North Korean copy of China's Type 63, has 12 tubes, can fire Korean or Chinese ammo, and launch salvos up to 8.5 kilometers. And then while the report focuses on the specific video, it's important to add that in February 2025, Japanese broadcaster NHK reported that Moscow and Pyongyang reached an agreement for Russian technical assistance in developing and mass producing multiple drone types for North Korea. And by June 2025, Ukrainian military chief, Intel Chief Budanov, stated that Russia was assisting North Korea in producing Garpir and Garan long-range kamikaze drones modeled on Iran's Shahed 136. Pyongyang also sent specialists to Moscow's Technopark for drone development. Russia's support for North Korea goes beyond drones. Moscow's reportedly transferred at least one Pantsir air defense system and provided data feedback from North Korean ballistic missile launches, helping improve Pyongyang's missile accuracy and overall operational performance. I assume as well they're going to be giving North Korea a bunch of maybe tech information, but I would have thought maybe grain and maybe oil as well, because that's fairly abundant in Russia, although we're hearing that crop yields are down this year. For the Korean Peninsula, this trajectory signals a more capable, modernized North Korean force, moving beyond outdated mid-20th century playbooks. Globally, the risk extends further. Pyongyang has long supplied weapons to sanctioned actors, contributing to global instability. While it's uncertain how far North Korea can scale or replicate these lessons across its armed forces due to serious financial constraints, it's clear that this experience won't be buried, and Pyongyang will apply these insights wherever feasible. Now, talking about Korea, someone was saying in one of the threads the other day that North Korea doing that should really annoy South Korea. So South Korea should be big on supporting Ukraine, but there's been that toppling of the government, and the new guy who was in the White House the other day appears to be much more aligned to Trump and not wanting to support Ukraine in the way that South Korea could and I think should. And that's really, really frustrating. So there, and the last thing I'm going to say is the EU is considering restrictions against Russia in the energy and financial sectors, as well as secondary sanctions similar to those imposed by the US as part of the 19th sanctions package. So this is really good that the EU is still thinking long and hard about how to hammer Russia's economy. This is so important. Everybody understands that. Considering how Putin is mocking the peace efforts, the only thing that works is pressure, Kaja Kallas said before the informal meeting of foreign affairs and defense ministers in Copenhagen. I really want to go to Copenhagen. Before the boys were born, I used to have a camper van. I was going to get, there used to be a ferry that went from, was it Harwich in the UK to Copenhagen, and I was going to go on my camper van, in the camper van with my missus. And then we had the twins, and then that was the end of that. Yeah, I'd like to go there. Anyway, that's enough for me. Right. Thank you very much to one and all here. And Mark Bisque, welcome to the chat, man. I'm driving through the prairies from Regina back to Calgary, and I would appreciate you talking for another 5 hours to get me through the drive. Thanks. I could do one of my long goodbyes, Mark, where I just whittle on about nothing and anything. Cabbages and kings, as we say sometimes. I can talk about cabbages and kings till the cows come home. Yeah, I don't think I'd have any audience apart from Mark and Oliner sitting in the car, or don't know if Oliner's with him. Maybe it's just Mark driving on his own, listening to me whittling on. So let's just have a last minute look at the news that's hitting. My dad's trying to call me over and over and over, which is kind of how he operates these days. And I'm supposed to go around there and sort out his computer. So I'm in a bit of trouble. So let's have a look to see whether there is any latest news coming out of Ukraine that is worthy of note. We have Andrei Yermak is meeting with Steve Witkoff in the US at the moment. That's really important. Andrei Yermak is obviously quite forthright. He rubs a lot of people up in the US the wrong way. Steve Witkoff is just a complete idiot. So there you go. There's a dynamic there. What else do we have? Trump's approval rating has fallen to a new low. Yeah, 37% of voters saying they approve, 55% disapprove. Yeah, I've been seeing some fascinating stuff. The CDC, oh my goodness, just everything going on in American politics at the moment is just crazy. But I won't sidetrack onto American politics for this video. Just see if there's anything pertinent to like security guarantees. Hungary was the only country not to support the joint EU statement condemning strikes on Kyiv. The list of countries backing the resolution does not include Hungary, who new. What quelle surprise, as they might say in France. A face-to-face meeting between Zelensky and Putin won't happen unless the US ups pressure on the Russian leader, a source in Ukraine's president's office has told the Kyiv Independent. Yeah, I don't think it will. I think it would take, it's not going to happen. So the question is, if, it comes to Monday and it hasn't happened, there's your 2 weeks elapsing. What does the US do? And if they do nothing, like Trump is just so weak and just never follows through on his word. He is actually, Trump, like some people think he's really belligerent and he loves a bit of conflict, but actually there are many analysts who say Trump doesn't like conflict. He likes people acquiescing to him, and he likes to threaten and then get people to just do what he wants. But when it actually comes to butting heads, he doesn't really like that conflict. I think he just expects and wants everyone to be genuflecting to him, on their knees in front of him, and be some kind of imperialistic dictator or something. And conflict is something he finds uncomfortable. And conflict between him and someone he otherwise likes and respects, Vladimir Putin, a murderous dictator, he just doesn't want conflict. It has nothing to do with strategy. He's not bothered about Ukraine prevailing. He doesn't care for Ukraine. He cares for himself and how he feels and how he wants the world to look. And he just wants people to say nice things about him all the time. That 3 hour, 3 hour 15 cabinet meeting the other day was just a string of people saying how wonderful he was, one after the other. And Marco Rubio doodling on a piece of paper because he was dying inside. Well, you're complicit in that, Marco Rubio. But it was one of the most horrific things you can imagine for an American presidency. Like the day after a massive banner of Trump's face is unfurled over the Labor Department building, all these purges going on in the Department of Defense and the CDC. We hear that the Doge, when Doge came along and took everyone's data, the guy Big Balls, the reason why Trump sent the National Guard into Washington is because Big Balls, this young kid who was the Doge guy, that was carjacked in Washington. So he used that as an excuse to then send the National Guard into Washington, which had the lowest crime rates on record or whatever. And he's like, oh, crime's horrific, sends in the National Guard. Turns out that the Big Balls and the data that Doge took was then uploaded to an insecure cloud, and essentially everyone in the US might need a new social security number. Like, it's that bad. Like, and they're not talking about it enough, but the data breach, there should be an absolutely behemoth lawsuit against Elon Musk and Doge and the Trump administration for an absolutely horrific data breach that was done as Doge just went in and scraped everyone's data. And then, but then when you look at Big Balls' background, like this kid, like this is completely unsurprising. So anyway, I won't go into it now, but it is, I've just gone into it a bit. It's absolutely horrific. Right. Anything else? Exciting day for Ukraine as Kyivstar, Ukraine's leading telecoms company, rings the opening bell at NASDAQ and becomes the only Ukrainian company listed on the US stock exchange. Ukrainian Prime Minister Yulia Syrydenko and head of the presidential office, Andriy Yermak, were in attendance for the moment. Obviously, he's meeting Steve Witkoff. Yes. Don't think there's anything else that I need to share with you at the moment. Apart from this, so Zelensky has again admitted that they cannot restore all occupied territory. Quote from Zelensky: "The war can be ended either by military or diplomatic means, but we understand that we won't be able to restore the borders today with weapons. We do not have enough strength, but Russia will not be able to occupy us either." So apparently there's a plan that's being developed between the Ukrainians and I don't know who else. But there were some claims last night that I was reading that they have plans to get territory back diplomatically after the war ends. So there are obviously options for the Ukrainians, at least according to movers and shakers, I guess, for Ukraine to get their territory back. If they do, at least de facto allow Russia to retain control of some of these territories. When it becomes de jure, so when, you know, if it's written down that everyone internationally recognizes those territories, and that's part of the arrangements, then obviously things are going to be much more difficult. What they want is Russia to be de facto in control of those places, but everyone in the international community pretty much recognizes that those territories are still Ukrainian. Then that gives Ukraine those options. Okay, right. I better go and see my dad. What do you guys have to say? An awful lot. Yes. Please don't forget to click the like and all that. Security guarantees will not be forthcoming unless all, says Viggo Holmsen, unless all parameters and rules of engagement are sorted out. Only then can the different countries go beyond claims of willingness to participate. I guess it comes down to, though, ceasefire. I can't believe that Donald Trump reneged on his very clear position on ceasefire. He was like, ceasefire, has to be a ceasefire. And then Ukraine and Europe were going, ceasefire. We will not do negotiations until there's a ceasefire. Everyone agreed on that. Trump met Putin in Alaska, and he comes out saying, yeah, not too sure about ceasefires, don't really need them. We just need a quick peace negotiations, much better than a ceasefire. What? So, yeah, there needs to be a ceasefire. And I mean, obviously, I'm going to agree with what Ukraine are stipulating, but I think they've got a very sensible approach to doing the negotiations, which is ceasefire first, and then we'll sit down and talk about it. We're not going to do things that are unconstitutional. We've got to pass it through the Ukrainian people and stop having your stupid maximalist things that are ridiculous, like demilitarization and denazification and blah, blah, blah. It's ridiculous. Okay. So thanks to everyone here. I really appreciate you. Thanks to all the people who have been supporting the channel in all the different ways. Buy me a coffee and PayPal, very, very generous. People like Mark Biscu, of course, Marcus Luboshka, Michael Winkler, all the wonderful people who support the channel. Thank you so much indeed. And I will speak to you soon. Just a question, NW Troller. It's just a question of outlasting Russia. I tell you, this is a game of attritional chicken, which plays into the idea of outlasting. But it's attritional chicken. That's what the war is along the front lines. Who can withstand the attrition the longest until something more fundamental happens, like an economic collapse? It's attritional chicken first and foremost. Anyway, take care. Speak soon. Two clips.